What do all these robots have in common? Well, for one thing, they all have a human inside every one of them. You see, all of these costumes were built by fans of Transformers or other robot shows. I'm here today to tell you that complex costumes of robots are possible, especially with a small budget, and if you keep it simple and you have a plan. The costume I built and which I'm going to be referring to throughout this speech is of a character called Grindor, or Blackout, depending on whether you're looking at the first or second Transformers film. Here. When I began thinking of how to build a costume of this guy, I basically looked at him as a human with a backpack. He has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, in very good proportion to a human, with basically large shoulders and helicopter blades running down his back. When I looked at it that way, it was a lot easier to design a costume because I draw Transformers similarly as well. I basically have human form, and then I add all the pieces on top, which I call armor, um, which define each and every robot. Normally, it's the characteristic color of a robot, in addition to being a characteristic shape for every piece. Since I had that design, I was basically able to tell myself I'm going to wear all black, and I'm just going to cover it in armor. There were other things that narrowed down my choices, though. For smaller pieces, a very good example of which would be one, which Blackout would have right here, like so, would be very thin and narrow. If I were to build that, it would be very brittle, and it probably would have broken. So I didn't include it. Another piece that I didn't include was be right here on my back. It would be a rectangular piece. There are other pieces on the back of the costume. As you'll see, there's nothing on the upper arms at all. This is the front, and this is the back. If I were to make the piece in the back, it would obviously get interference with this piece here, and it would probably get in the way of my arm movement as well. So I didn't include any of those pieces at all. There were a few other pieces I didn't include based on similar criteria, and that helped me narrow down exactly what design I was going to make. Another thing to consider when building a costume is whether the pieces are going to hinder with whether you want to be able to walk or if you want to be able to move at all. I have a fairly easy time walking in my costume the way it's designed. I can walk just fine in it as long as I watch my feet because they're brittle. The toes are very thin. Once I decided on the design and I knew exactly how thick the pieces were going to be, what they needed to be, I began collecting materials. Because I was cheap, I didn't go out and buy anything unless I absolutely had no other choice. I ended up buying a pair of gloves for this, and I had to buy extra hot glue sticks. I already had a hot glue gun, and a hot glue gun with hot glue sticks will be less than $10. It's really not that expensive. I also found cardboard and foam for my project because we had moved. You can go to Walmart or Sam's Club, and all they do with their cardboard when they're restocking things is they'll go bale it in the back. They'll be happy to give you some, I'm sure. I know other fans who have done it, so it is possible to get cardboard that way, which is very handy for making a cheap costume that looks good. So once I had all my materials together, I had to decide what every piece I wanted to make out of because I had cardboard, which is thinner but stronger, and I had foam, which is lighter and thicker. I can get a lot more mass with styrofoam, but it's not going to be as sturdy. To decide between the pieces, I'll use the hand as a reference. These were the gloves I bought just for this project specifically, and all the armor on the hands had to be thin so that I could fit my fingers in between them and so that I can move. I have absolutely no problem grabbing objects with my gloves. I have a lot of movement. I can make a fist, nanu, move my thumbs around. I can go and grab objects just fine. It's difficult with smaller things, but that's to be expected with only 2 fingers. And again, these had to be sturdy, so they had to be cardboard and they had to be thin. I had single layered cardboard for this, and an example of another time when I used something else would be on the wrist. This had to be a half circular piece, and it had to be thicker than cardboard. So I used styrofoam for this one. It's a lightweight styrofoam. It's very squishy, but when you paint it, it makes it a little bit more sturdy. After I decided on what material I was going to use for every piece, based on how much stress it was going to be under, or how thick it needed to be for presentation purposes, aesthetic purposes,